Thank you everybody for coming. My talk is named Ctrl+Alt+Communicate, and we're going to be talking about the importance of soft skills in tech. So I just wanted to start by asking everybody, if you've ever worked with a difficult colleague, can you put your hand up, please? Right, and keep your hand up if that colleague happened to be your boss. So that's when it gets a bit more difficult. But I'd like to think people don't really wake up in the morning going, right, I'm going to be a real jerk today. People don't actually want to be bad at their jobs. But a lot of the time in tech, it happens because people aren't trained in the human side of tech, the human skills. At the end of the day, we're all human. So hi, I'm Katie Willoughby. I have founded ProTech. ProTech delivers soft skills workshops to tech companies that are grounded in real-world tech scenarios. They're developed in collaboration with behavioural psychologists and scientists, and they're specifically researched for teaching models that will land with neurodiverse and neurotypical learners. So it's all about protecting your future in tech. In the AI world that we are currently in, the tech landscape looks very, very different. There are an awful lot of layoffs. I'm sure all of you know some really great people who have had a turbulent time over the last couple of years. Whether or not you believe the AI hype, businesses are being pushed to be leaner and more efficient, and we can see that happening around us. So then myself, as a career analyst and head of a department, I started to think about, well, what sets me apart? When my company is looking at all of their things, what are the reasons why they can't get rid of me? And I think soft skills in tech are a real cheat code for your career. And it's particularly difficult if a lot of those skills don't come naturally to you. We're also myth-busting a few things. If you sat down in your performance review and your manager said, hey, Katie, you're really awful at Python, but this is a key part of your role, I can guarantee they'd put me on boot camps, they'd tell me I need to be certified, they'd give me all the support in the world to get there. But I've seen it time and time again where they'll say to somebody who really wants a promotion, not this year, and they kind of dance around the subject and they don't tell you why. Why can't I be a manager? Why can't I be a leader? Why can't I earn more money? And sometimes that's your employer just doesn't think you're the right fit. They think you're not a good team player, you can't talk strategy, you don't understand what the business is doing. But these skills can be taught in the same way as coding can be taught. If you practice being empathetic, creating space for other people, being a great team player for a year, and you're really self-aware, you're going to get better and better and better at these things. And eventually you're going to have those skills. So it's really getting employers to realise that. Just a few stats about the gap in tech. The reason we're looking specifically and commissioning research backed by Invest NI into neurodivergent teaching models is because the tech sector has twice the incidence of neurodivergent people than the UK average. Also, staff turnover is 10% higher than in all other UK sectors combined. That's probably for a lot of reasons, but from my own experience, I've worked in tech for almost a decade now across a range of different roles, as you heard in my intro. And I have had some wonderful experiences and I have had some awful experiences. And it's not usually because of the work I'm doing. It's the people I'm working with, it's the team, it's directly my manager. I've certainly left what I have thought were my dream jobs because of somebody else. You know, it's a real breeding ground, like I said before. I don't think it's our fault. We work in really high pressure environments. We're constantly told that we need to upskill, keep up with AI that's coming out. Potentially you're a graduate and you're working your first data role. Let's say you're in data consulting and you're putting this huge contract, maybe it's worth $1 million. And you're really aware it's worth $1 million, but that's not a fraction, you know, of what your salary is. Has anybody taught you how to deal with that pressure, to understand that in the real world and to keep moving through your job and doing a great job? It would be my experience that very often these things aren't taught. And if they are, it's like a one and done. Send you on a leadership course, great, now you're a great leader. That's just not how a lot of these things work. So the World Economic Forum released a report on, it's called the Future of Jobs Report. They released it in 2025. And it looks at the core skills that we're going to need in 2030. And very luckily for me in this presentation, the majority of those skills are soft. So we do have AI and big data up the top. We're looking in this segment right here. But we've also got empathy. We have creative thinking, resilience, agility, analytical thinking, social influence, and a big one for me is curiosity. As a data analytics team leader, the best people in my team are curious. They're those really annoying ones who are going, why did we do it like that? Is there not another way? Just because it's always been done like that, is that the best way? Can we use this software instead? So some of these things are just so important. Okay, so this stat is a big one. Over 53% of tech workers identify as neurodivergent when somebody asks them directly. Okay, I'm sure you can imagine, but this stat is very different when we talk about employers and what they're reporting. They're reporting around 3% neurodivergent employees. And the reason for this is we don't like to self-identify. You don't want to put your hand up and say, actually, I really struggle with X, Y, Z, particularly when you're young or you're at the beginning of your career, because you just want to do an amazing job. You don't want anybody to think of you any different. You don't want to be left out of conversations when they're having, when they're thinking about who to promote. You don't want them going, oh, but Katie's neurodivergent, maybe she'll struggle with this and she won't be able to cope with that. We just don't want it. But the reality is, if we're not tailoring everything we're doing in tech right now for neurodivergence, we're going to get left behind because there is so much awareness and diagnosis. There is not more neurodivergence. It's always been there. It's just we're more aware now. So if we're aware, we can't keep ignoring it. So this is just a little image to show you how a lot of training works right now. It's one size fits all. It's verbal heavy. There's a lot of cognitive overload, and there's a lack of transfer to the real world, which just causes a bit of disengagement. You go because your employer sent you, and you go away, and maybe you had a few nice ideas, but you usually don't take much from it. And then we've got ProTech. So as I've said, we've research commissioned into neuro-inclusive learning and teaching models. We're wanting to harness diverse thinking for innovation. Innovation's a real buzzword, but are employers really including everybody and getting all those voices that will drive innovation? We're also built and tested by experts in behavioural psychology and cognitive diversity. And yes, it's a classroom-based model, but it's all grounded in real-world tech scenarios and taught by tech people. Okay, so I'm going to do a little taster session today of some of the things that we are actually delivering. So we've developed a series called Emotional Intelligence that is a series of 8 different workshops, and I'm going to touch today on psychological safety. The reason I'm going to talk about psychological safety is because it underpins absolutely everything that we do. I can't teach emotional intelligence, having a difficult conversation, how to deal with conflict, if your team has zero psychological safety, because it just isn't going to happen. So that's why we start with this. We have been working with Jason Lear, who some of you may know. He is a behavioural scientist and TEDx Black Mountain curator. And he's bringing all of the behavioural science elements of this for me, and I am bringing all of your real-world tech scenarios on how this can help us as tech people. Okay, so put your hand up if you think you have a good understanding of what psychological safety is, or, keep your hand down if it's just a buzzword you kind of know about, but you don't really know what it is. Okay, great. So we're kind of half and half. So Amy Edmondson has defined it as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So, interpersonal risk-taking. We're all very good at impression management. So she talks about things like, we don't want to look incompetent. If you don't want to look incompetent, then you just don't admit your mistakes. We don't want to look like we're ignorant. if you don't want to look ignorant, you don't ask questions. And we also all don't want to look negative. So there's this real big problem here with impression management, particularly when there's low psychological safety. Amy did a load of research where she looked at 2 different teams. One was a really high-performing team and one was a low-performing team. So she was really concerned when she found out that the high-performing team made an awful lot more mistakes than the low-performing team. And she was like, oh, this isn't what I wanted my research to say. This isn't what I wanted to write about. But then she looked a bit more into it, and she found out that it wasn't actually that the high-performing team were making more mistakes. They were both making similar amount of mistakes. The high-performing team was reporting it a lot more. They were talking about it. They could fix it, innovate faster, and move on. Whereas the low-performing team, oh dear, I've lost my slides. The low-performing team, we're back. Sorry, yeah, the low-performing team had just as many mistakes, but they weren't reporting them. So this is a real time waster and can end up catastrophic for a business. Okay, so I'm just going to let you have a wee read through the low and the high psychological safety lists. And you might resonate, or at least you should resonate with some things in both lists. Because psychological safety is a scale. You can't say, oh, my team's 100% psychologically safe or my team has no psychological safety. We all sit somewhere on this scale, and every team will sit somewhere on this scale, but you have people within that team. I could feel, absolutely, I can say what I want to say, I can question leadership, I can do what I like. But somebody else in my team might feel completely different. They might feel nobody ever asks me questions, nobody ever wants my opinion. I'm going to avoid feedback because I know it's going to be really negative, and therefore I'm not going to take any risks. So we need to get all of our teams to a point where there's a baseline psychological safety that we can all strive to have, and that really starts with awareness. So I want you to think about your own work context. What is the equivalent of a severe outage in your team? For me, this would be us running a weekly report, and one of my analysts sees a data integrity issue. They don't mention it, we keep going with the report as we do every week. The business takes it and they go and make a decision off of this. Okay, so they've just made decisions off of wrong data. So then if we think about, when was the last time somebody in your team caught a problem early because they felt safe to raise it? This is great. Safe voices mean we can have early intervention, and it saves time, saves trust, and it saves money. It's also about reacting in the right way. If you react the right way to somebody raising an issue, even if it's their fault, if you focus on processes rather than people, and maybe you step away and you come back to the person after you've got over your frustration and you say, thank you so much for flagging that. That was really helpful. Thank you for doing that. Then you build that trust, and that'll happen again and again. And if you model that in front of your other team members, that's a great way to build safety. Whereas on the other hand, if you think about what might happen if that same person didn't feel safe the next time. So when safety drops, so does vigilance, and so does retention. It's a really anxiety-inducing state to know that something's wrong, know that you know it's wrong, and you're just keeping it going. Like, you're just waiting. You're waiting for something to implode. So to really think about those things. And again, it all comes back to self-awareness. So tech speed, interdependence, and complexity magnify the cost of silence. So this is about why we need a tailored approach in tech. Generic leadership training right now doesn't hugely land with what we're doing in tech because, maybe the facilitator doesn't really understand your pressures, or they're going to talk about a to-do list you can do at the start of the week. Whereas we know in tech, my to-do list on a Monday morning is completely blown out of the water by Monday afternoon and never seen again. So this is just a slide to illustrate the type of pressures we have that a lot of other sectors don't have. We're working across huge contracts. We've urgent requests. We're remote working a lot of the time. And not just that, we're working across different cultures of different teams everywhere. So microaggressions are picked up on, that person who's sighing at you, rolling their eyes. Jokes that we tell in Belfast might not land as well in other places. And you're not meaning any harm to somebody, but you've completely alienated them and they're never going to speak again. So I want to be really clear that psychological safety is not about us being super nice to everybody and walking on eggshells. Actually, it's the opposite. It's having enough respect and trust in your team to be candid in a respectful way. Okay, I'm going to look into a few interesting case studies now in the tech sector. So hopefully there are people as old as me and their first phone was a Nokia 3310. Okay, so what happened to Nokia? If we look at the timeline of this, Nokia held over 50% of the global mobile phone market in 2007. That was their real peak. For context, right now, Apple hold less than 20% of that. So to have 50% of the global market is mega. In 2007, the iPhone was released. In 2008, the Android was released. And then between 2008 and 2013, Nokia started its gradual collapse. And the end point was Nokia sold to Microsoft. So what actually happened? There's been a whole lot of research done into this. And yes, there are lots of different software reasons and a few other things, but the main thread that comes out of this research is that there was a lack of psychological safety. There was fear-based leadership. People were afraid to challenge leadership or deliver bad news. I've certainly, as an analyst, worked in companies where I've brought data to the table and said, oh, this is really bad, maybe we should do something about this. And my employer has said, oh no, Katie, let's look at this stat. 90% of people over here are really happy. Let's promote that. Put that in an advert. And it's really difficult then to push against that. Okay, so there's also this thing called a performance facade that they had at Nokia. Everybody's pretending things are better than they were. Of course, they had really, really smart engineers. They had a technology called Symbian. And these engineers knew exactly what Apple and Android were doing. Apple and Android weren't the cause of Nokia's collapse. They knew, and actually they had prototyped the technology for buttonless touchscreen phones before Apple did. They just were never able to bring it to the market because of this lack of innovative thinking and a lack of, it was the person at the top making the decisions. So they could never get it far enough up to bring it into production. There was blame culture and politics, and people were afraid to take risks, so they just didn't. So in terms of Nokia, it was catastrophic for their business having an environment of low psychological safety. But there are much worse examples where lives are lost. So you'll have all seen recently the Titan, the Ocean Gate submersible, where 5 lives were lost. And this was because the guy driving it was just so, I want to do this, and this is the best thing, and this is innovative. And it's well documented that the engineers who were saying, this isn't safe, we can't do this, they just got fired. They just got fired. It was like, right, see you later. So the people in the company saw that, and they saw the lack of psychological safety, and they thought, oh, I know something's wrong, but I'm not going to say anything because I'll lose my job. And it's almost a bit of manipulation where then the people at the top are going, oh, you're great, aren't you wonderful, because you're being compliant, which actually happens a lot in tech companies. Again, with Boeing, the headline for this is great. But 346 lives were lost, and engineers knew that the software just didn't work, but they were competing with Airbus. In our world right now, we're competing right now to get out products that potentially our competitors are working on at the same time, at the same speed. We want to land first. That brings a whole load of pressure. Not only do we want to land first, we want it to be great. So if I'm working in a sprint and I see a major catastrophe in the middle of the sprint, am I going to mention it? Because I'll derail the sprint, I'll set us back however long, X, Y, and Z are going to be annoyed. It's about having enough psychological safety where these things despite the consequences, can be called out so that your team is able to move on and innovate. And then again with Chernobyl. So in Chernobyl, we've no idea how many lives were lost because of the radiation afterwards. It just wasn't socially acceptable at the time to question your superiors. Okay, so just wanted to look at a little model here, a taster of the type of things we might look at in a workshop. And think about your current state of psychological safety in your team or in your company. There are driving forces that promote it, things like transparent communication, and there are restraining forces that erode it, things like blame culture, perfectionism, being focused on speed and deadlines. The longer arrows are the ones that you're doing more of, and the shorter arrows you're doing less of. So if you recognise employees sometimes, but not always, that would be a shorter arrow. And you know, we're not talking about, you don't want to get rid of all the eroding, you'll never get rid of all the eroding forces. Yes, you do want to get rid of them, but you won't. It's about reducing them as much as you can and making the arrows on your driving side as big as possible so you can reach this baseline state where everybody in your team has some level of psychological safety. Okay, so I want to leave you with a couple of practical takeaways. Of course, if you come to our workshop, we have a tool where you can measure and monitor your psychological safety. As an analyst, I like to measure everything. So we do have tools like that, and also full workbooks where you have scenarios that you can take away and embed into your everyday job. Obviously, this is just a taster session. I have left here Amy Edmondson's YouTube on psychological safety, her TED Talk, because she's great, and also her book, The Fearless Organisation, where a lot of these principles come from. And then just some AI tools. You know, if you want to find out a little bit more about your team, be a little bit more open and transparent, you can use tools like Office Vibe or Tiny Pulse. They allow people in your team to give anonymous feedback. There's also meeting reflection notes like Fathom and Firefly. As a head of department, this can be really important for me to look at some of our meetings and see who is actually speaking and who isn't speaking. Why are they not? Am I creating an environment where they can share ideas, or am I shutting them down without even realising it? And then we've got tone checks like Grammarly, WordTune, ChatGPT. You might not realise how your email's coming across. It might be scary, it might be blunt. The more you use tools like this, you can be a lot more aware of that and then naturally get better at how you're phrasing things. So small signals reveal big truths, and noticing them is the first step towards improvement. So that's me. I would love you to get in touch, have a look at the website. We're quite funny on TikTok, so please have a good look. And I would love to take any questions if anybody has any.
Are there any questions? We have a mic here, so if you raise your hand, the mic will come to you.
I guess, sorry, something just popped into my mind. You showed us the Nokia case study.
Yep.
I think okay. Hello? 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 Is that where it sounds the same to me? But yeah, you showed us the Nokia case study. Is there something of like a really positive case study where a company embraced some of these ideas and were able to sort of pull themselves out of a ditch or transform themselves in some way?
There definitely are, and that'll be a really great one for my next talk. Thank you for flagging. I'll get one of those in there.
Any other questions? If not, just one question there.
How often do you find that somewhere that's like really restrictive, if they go through the workshop or not, how many of them do you find end up becoming an actual like positive place to psychologically safe?
Like I said, it's super hard to measure because my perception of safety versus yours in the exact same team are going to be completely different. And you're right, a lot of companies have policies and procedures in place or can feel very hierarchical, which makes it very, very difficult. So a lot of what ProTech is trying to do is get in at all levels. We need to be sending people to these workshops who don't know that they need it. Because if you're arrogant or you're a narcissist or whatever else, you don't know that. You don't go home thinking, oh, aren't I a great narcissist? You know, so we need to be in companies where everybody goes through this. The real dream for me is, and we have a whole series of workshops, this was just a taster of one, is that companies are investing as much in soft skills as what they are in their technical skill sets. And you could go to an employer that is partnered with ProTech and just automatically know that this employer, whether they're great at psychological safety or not, they're trying, they're investing in this, they're sending everybody, they're trying to get to a baseline. You know, I'm very passionate about accessibility in tech. I don't want to stand here and say, go to a workshop and it's going to fix everything. I don't believe that at all. But I believe we should be trying to make a better culture for everybody and make it a safer place to work so everybody feels like they have a space here.
Katie, thank you again. Really enjoyed what you've shared. If you could just show your appreciation. Thank you.